The moment those words left her mouth in front of 32 people at the country club, I felt something crystallize inside me. Cold. Perfect. Inevitable. She smiled like she'd just delivered a compliment. My husband's mother had spent 18 years finding new ways to tell me I was beneath him. But never quite so publicly. Never quite so proudly. I set down my champagne glass, took a long breath, and decided she was about to learn what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. My name is Raven. I'm 34 years old. This happened 6 weeks ago, on a Saturday afternoon in April, at the Whitmore Country Club in Boston. The occasion was supposed to be a celebration, our 18th wedding anniversary party, which my mother-in-law, Constance, had insisted on hosting to finally do it right, her exact words. I should have known. I should have felt it coming the way you feel a pressure change in the air before a storm. But I'd learned long ago that sometimes the cruelest moments announce themselves only in hindsight. Let me take you back further, though, to where this story really begins. Not with Constance, with me, and with the decision I made at 23 years old that would set everything else in motion. I grew up in Portland, the middle child of 3 in a family where achievement was currency, and affection was something you earned through success. My father was a federal judge. My mother ran a nonprofit focused on women's legal rights. My older brother became an orthopedic surgeon. My younger sister became an investment banker. I became an accountant because I loved numbers the way other people loved art. They told stories if you knew how to read them. They never lied. They never favored one child over another. They simply existed as truth. My parents raised us with what I can only describe as sophisticated indifference. We were loved in theory, celebrated for our accomplishments, and largely left alone to figure out the emotional landscape on our own. There was a woman who raised us alongside my parents, though, my grandmother, Eleanor. She lived in the guest house behind our property for as long as I can remember, and she was the soft place we all fell when the achievement culture inside the main house grew too heavy. Grandma Eleanor had a way of seeing people, not judging them, seeing them. She'd catch my eye across the dinner table when my father made a cutting remark about my choice of profession. Accounting, he'd say, is what people do when they're afraid of real ambition. And she'd wink at me. Just that, a wink. And somehow I'd know that I was enough exactly as I was. When I was in college, she gave me a leather journal and told me to write down 3 things: the truth I knew about myself, the lies people had told me about who I should be, and the wisdom I'd need when someone tried to make me choose between them. I still have that journal. I've added to it over the years. At 23, I met Marcus at a conference in New York. He was warm, where my family was austere. He laughed easily. He seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts, my opinions, my interior life. He pursued me with the kind of attention I'd been craving, without quite knowing it. Looking back now, I understand that I confused being seen by someone for being truly known. But at 23, I didn't have those distinctions yet. I married him at 25. Constance made her first cutting remark at the wedding reception, said loud enough for me to hear, but quiet enough that Marcus wouldn't quite catch it. Something about how my family wasn't quite the caliber we'd hoped for, Marcus. He apologized afterward, assured me she didn't mean it, said that's just how she was with everyone. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Over the next 18 years, I learned that Constance had a gift for cruelty, wrapped in the language of concern. When I was pregnant with our first child, she told me I should probably hire a trainer because carrying weight never looks as graceful on some women as it does others. When I was promoted to senior accountant at my firm, she suggested that maybe I was working too much, and that's why our marriage was struggling, which, to be clear, wasn't struggling until she kept insisting it was. When our daughter was born with darker skin than expected, Marcus's mother is Italian, Marcus's father was adopted from Brazil, Constance actually had the audacity to ask, in front of everyone, if there was something about the birth we weren't telling people. Each time, I did what I'd learned to do in my family of origin. I stayed quiet. I counted the seconds. I filed away the information like evidence, though I didn't yet know what trial I was building a case for. Marcus never stood up to her, not once. He'd deflect, apologize on her behalf, explain away her behavior. "That's just Mom," he'd say. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But words mean things. Intentions matter, yes, but they matter less than impact. And the impact of 18 years of systematic small cruelties is a wound you don't even realize you're carrying until you move the wrong way and it takes your breath. By the time we reached that Saturday in April at the country club, I wasn't just tired. I was done. I'd spent 18 years being polite, appropriate, above the fray. I'd spent 18 years showing up to family dinners, absorbing insults disguised as jokes, watching my children navigate a grandmother who loved them only when they exceeded expectations. And I'd spent the last 3 years quietly gathering something that Constance didn't know existed. The anniversary party was in full swing when Constance cornered me near the appetizer table. I was wearing a dress that I'd had tailored perfectly. Midnight blue, elegant, expensive. I'd felt good in it that morning. That feeling lasted until she caught sight of me and said, loud enough for several people to turn and listen, "Oh, Raven, you look lovely. Such a brave choice with your, coloring. And the cut really does distract from..." She made a vague gesture at my entire body. "Well, anyway, you're a good sport about it all." Then she turned to the small gathering of people who'd stopped to listen, and delivered her line like she was presenting the gift of profound wisdom. "You know what I've always said? Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made." Of course, he didn't have the backbone to actually do it, so here we all are. She laughed. I'm joking, obviously. Mostly. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. I could taste it, almost metallic on my tongue. Some of the country club members looked away, suddenly very interested in their cocktails. Marcus's face had gone pale. Our daughter, who was 14 and standing nearby, looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I smiled. A real smile. Not the tight, polite one I'd been wearing for 18 years, and said, "You know what, Constance? That's a fascinating thing to say. I think we should all hear exactly what you mean by that. And more importantly, I think everyone here should know something about you. Give me 5 minutes." I walked to my purse. I retrieved a folder that I'd been carrying with me to this event for exactly this reason. I never expected to use it. I'd hoped I wouldn't have to. But I'd also learned that hope is not a strategy. Everything I was about to do was motivated by one principle: the truth. Not revenge, not cruelty, just the careful, methodical presentation of facts. 3 years earlier, after another particularly cruel string of comments from Constance, I'd made a decision. I'd hired a forensic accountant to audit my marriage. Not because I suspected infidelity, but because Marcus had spent 18 years insisting that his mother's cruelty was just how she was, while simultaneously making financial decisions that consistently benefited Constance. She'd given us a down payment on our first house. She'd helped with our children's education. She'd paid for vacations. And with every check, Marcus's loyalty had shifted subtly away from me and toward her. What the forensic accountant found was that Marcus and Constance had been engaged in a long-term financial arrangement. She'd give him money, he'd give her control. Over 18 years, Constance had effectively purchased a veto over his marriage, his parenting decisions, his career choices. When I'd pushed back against her influence, Marcus had pulled away. When I'd tried to set boundaries, he'd sided with his mother. The financial records made it explicit in a way that no amount of emotional pleading ever could. I'd also been documenting her behavior, in real time, for 3 years. Dates, times, witnesses, direct quotes. What I had was a record of systematic emotional abuse disguised as family connection, spanning nearly 2 decades, aimed at both me and our children. What I also had was something far more powerful than any of that. Constance had made a critical mistake 6 months earlier. In a text conversation with Marcus, which I'd discovered while researching the financial arrangements, she'd written something truly damning. She'd written it while on wine, during a family vacation, complaining about me to her son. And she'd written it in language that was so explicitly cruel, so deliberately designed to humiliate and damage, that Marcus himself had finally felt something crack. He'd shown me that text. He'd looked at me and said, "I think I've been making a terrible mistake." That text was the first piece in the folder I was holding. I walked back to where Constance stood, still smiling her triumphant smile, still radiant with the sense that she'd finally won. And I began to read. "I'm going to read you some things now," I said, my voice steady and quiet. Everyone in the country club had gone silent by this point. "These are text messages between you and your son, Constance. This one is from December 14th at 11:47 p.m. You wrote, 'The only reason Marcus hasn't left her is because he's weak, and because I've made it financially impossible for him to leave. If he leaves her, I'm cutting him off. He knows that. That's why he stays. She'll never know what she actually is to us. A placeholder. A woman to practice on before he finds someone worthy.'" Constance's face went white. "Absolutely white," I continued. "This is from January 3rd. I've been paying her to stay married to him. Every vacation, every school payment, every dinner. I'm purchasing her compliance. The moment I stop paying, she'll see that Marcus was never truly hers." And this one, from February 8th, is my personal favorite. "The children barely acknowledge her. They know where their loyalty needs to be. They'll be ours within 5 years. Mark my words." I looked at my daughter. She was crying silently, but she was nodding. She'd suspected as much. Children always know when they're being triangulated. They just don't have the language for it until they're older. "There's more," I said. "Financial records showing that you've been loaning money to Marcus through a complicated series of transactions specifically designed to create obligation and control. There are email records of you coaching him on how to gaslight me into accepting your presence in our marriage. And there's a recording, several recordings actually, of you coaching him on how to prioritize your relationship over his marriage." Constance was shaking now. "You're insane," she whispered. "I'm very sane," I replied. "I'm also thorough. I've documented 18 years of emotional abuse, and I've turned it all over to my attorney, Richard Chen, who's standing over there by the bar. He's waiting for you to retain your own counsel. We'll be filing for a civil suit regarding financial coercion, emotional harm to a minor, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "But here's what I want you to understand," I continued, and my voice dropped even lower. "I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for my daughter. I'm doing this so that she understands that being polite does not mean accepting cruelty. Being kind does not mean remaining silent when someone is hurting the people you love. And I'm doing this so that she remembers that when someone shows you who they are, you believe them." Marcus was crying by this point. Real tears. The kind that come when you finally see what you've been part of. Behind us, a country club member was discreetly texting someone. Within hours, Constance's behavior would be the subject of conversation in every social circle she'd occupied for the last 20 years. By Monday morning, 3 charitable organizations would ask her to step down from their boards. I folded the folder and placed it in my purse. "Marcus and I are going to need to have a very long conversation about where we go from here." But everyone in this room now understands something very clearly. I stayed silent for 18 years. That's 18 years I'll never get back. 18 years my daughter spent believing that manipulation and cruelty are acceptable ways to maintain relationships. That ends today. The aftermath unfolded exactly the way truth tends to unfold when it's finally released into a space where lies have been living rent-free. Constance's social circle fractured within days. Women who'd spent 20 years nodding along with her cutting comments suddenly remembered that they'd found her exhausting all along. The financial arrangements between her and Marcus had to be unwound through a mediator, which meant that Marcus finally had to accept exactly how much of his autonomy had been purchased. His therapist, who he started seeing immediately after the country club incident, helped him understand what emotional enmeshment with a narcissistic parent actually looks like. We didn't divorce, though I came close to filing papers. What we did instead was agree to marriage counseling. Real counseling, not the performative kind. Marcus had to do the work of separating his own identity from his mother's, which meant he had to experience her rage when he stopped taking her calls, experience her attempts at guilt manipulation, experience the very real consequences of setting boundaries with someone who'd never had any. Constance tried to turn it around initially. She called Marcus crying, said I'd coerced her into admitting things she didn't mean, claimed that the financial arrangements were just her way of showing love. When he didn't waver, she tried a different approach with me, an email offering what she framed as an apology, which was really just another opportunity for her to position herself as the victim of my cruelty. I never responded. A week later, she sent a letter to our children. Not an apology, an attempt at reconciliation that started with the phrase, "I know your mother has poisoned you against me, but I want you to know that I've always loved you in the way I know how." Our daughter, who is now so much clearer about what manipulation looks like, didn't fall for it. Our son, who was 10 at the time, asked if we could please not tell Grandma that he was on the honor roll, because he was tired of hearing her compare it to his cousin's achievements. That broke something open in Marcus. He realized, finally, that his mother had been systematically grooming his children for the same patterns of conditional love that had bound him. He set what therapists call healthy boundaries, which in practice meant that Constance saw our children twice a year, supervised, with very clear rules about what was and wasn't acceptable to say. 6 months after the country club incident, Marcus asked me if I'd forgiven him. I told him I wasn't sure forgiveness was what he needed to ask for. What I needed was to see him choosing our marriage, our children, our family as the primary loyalty in his life. What I needed was to watch him grieve the mother he thought he had and accept the mother he actually had. That's harder work than forgiveness. That's the work of actually changing. We're still here, 18 months later. The marriage is different now, quieter in some ways, harder in other ways, because Marcus finally understands what I'd been carrying for 18 years. The intimacy is different too, deeper, because it's built on actual honesty rather than the performance of a functional family. Last month, my daughter got her college acceptance letters. Harvard, Yale, Stanford. She chose Stanford, which is 4 hours away from our house, and also from where Constance lives. When my daughter told my mother what she'd decided, my mother asked her why she wasn't staying on the East Coast to be closer to family. My daughter smiled, my smile, I noticed, and said, "Because family is a choice, not an obligation. And I'm choosing to build my life exactly where I want it." That's what I wanted from all of this. Not revenge against Constance, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in watching the consequences of her behavior finally catch up with her. What I wanted was for my children to understand that being kind doesn't mean accepting unkindness, that maintaining family relationships never requires sacrificing your own well-being, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth and let the truth do its work. I think about that moment at the country club sometimes. I think about how quiet it was when I was finished speaking, how Constance's face looked like something had been erased from it. I don't feel triumph anymore when I remember it. I feel something closer to sadness. Constance didn't become who she was overnight. She was shaped by her own mother, by her own fears, by her own limitations. Understanding that didn't make her behavior acceptable, but it did make her slightly less of a villain and slightly more of a person who needed help she'd never sought. But here's what matters. Here's what I want you to understand if you're listening right now and recognizing your own story and mine. You don't have to accept cruelty dressed up as family obligation. You don't have to become smaller to make space for someone else's insecurity. And you don't have to choose between being kind and being honest. If this story moved something in you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to choose between loyalty to family and loyalty to yourself? Tell me what you chose and why. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's been carrying 18 years of small cruelties and thinking it's normal, share it with them. They might be ready to finally set it down. Thank you for being here all the way to the end. Subscribe if you're ready for another story like this one, and I'll see you very soon.